Hey, HBC fam, it's Olivia, your resident certified nurse midwife, and I'm so happy to have you here today because I really want to discuss a topic that I'm sure you've heard a lot about, but is still somehow confused, and that is preeclampsia or hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. There are about 76,000 women and 500,000 infants who die from complications of preeclampsia yearly. So that's a big deal. But before we get into the weeds and into the complexities of it all, I want to start with the basics. What is hypertension? What is blood pressure? You hear people talk about it all the time. Well, blood pressure is this. Blood pressure is simply how we talk about how hard our blood has to circulate through our arteries to get to the rest of the body. So think about it. Our heart is usually here, right? And it has to pump blood through our arteries to the rest of the body. Blood pressure measures how hard that current is. Think about water going through a pipe. How hard does that water have to press up against the pipe to get to where it needs to go? You usually hear, oh, perfect blood pressure is 120 over 80. Well, what does that mean? Those are just numbers. 120 is called the systolic blood pressure. That's the first number. We usually write it like a fraction, like 120/80, right? That 120 means how hard does the heart have to pump that blood through your arteries to get to where it needs to go? That's what that's measuring. The second number, that diastolic, that 80 in the 120 over 80, is what is the force of the blood in the arteries when your heart is resting? Think about your heartbeat. It's like boom, boom, pause, boom, boom, pause, right? That pause right there, what is the pressure in your arteries when it pauses? That is your blood pressure. And the reason we care about it is because we've discovered over centuries of time that if your blood pressure is elevated, meaning 140 over 90 or higher, is the general consensus. There's some wiggle room there. But generally, we say 140 over 90 or higher means that you have an increased risk of stroke, heart attack, heart diseases. So that's general blood pressure. So when people say, I have high blood pressure, I have hypertension, it means that you have a blood pressure that is elevated of 140 over 90 over a period of time. So you went to see the doctor one time and it was 140 over 90, and then after that, never again, you don't have high blood pressure. Maybe you were just stressed that day or running to see the doctor. But if it's consistent, say it's 2 weeks, 2 weeks in between visits and you see it, or you're at home checking your blood pressure, you go to the pharmacy and every time, baby, that's high blood pressure. You hear the terms toxemia, preeclampsia, gestational hypertension. People are always like, is that the same thing? I'm so confused. I watched, this show and they were talking about toxemia. I'm confused. So before the 20th century, toxemia was the general term for any time you had elevated blood pressure in pregnancy. There are a couple of differences, so it was the general term. As of the 21st century, we mostly call it now hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. Okay, so that can mean, just elevated blood pressure, can mean preeclampsia. What are the causes of hypertensive disorders in pregnancy? The truth is, aside from being pregnant, we're not actually sure. We don't have a definitive answer as to why these things are happening. There have been theories since the beginning of time, since there's been pregnancy and documented happenings of blood pressures rising in pregnancy. In the last century, the theory that we have kind of all come to accept as maybe the basic theory of what's going on is a little complex. So I'm going to try to explain it just really simply. Essentially, for some women, some pregnant people, when you're pregnant, the placenta has to implant into your uterus, okay? There's a theory that maybe when it implants, it might not implant correctly, or it might create what we call the cascade effect, which means it releases hormones or toxins or chemicals, however you want to call it, that makes your body react in a way that makes your arteries and your blood vessels get small, okay? That's called vasospasm. Which if you got a small opening, your pressure, the pressure of the blood to get through has to be much higher than if you have a big opening, right? You're trying to get it through. So that's kind of what we think is a theory. It's something about the placenta implanting and certain people's reaction to that. Okay, so that's what makes it, we think, is kind of the thing. And then it creates a cascade of effects, your kidneys, your liver, high blood pressure, all of these things. That's the real basic understanding of that. Usually, preeclampsia is not seen before 20 weeks. We don't really diagnose it before 20 weeks, but truly, it's not really that common before 28 weeks, which is about 7 months in your third trimester, later in pregnancy. So if I've seen you your whole pregnancy, you saw me when you were 12 weeks, you saw me when you were 15 weeks, and your blood pressure was totally normal, and then all of a sudden I see you at 21 weeks, and it's 140 over 90, I'm gonna raise an eyebrow. I'm gonna think, what's going on? Right? We're going to do some blood work. And then, depending on how your blood work comes back, if I see you again and your blood pressure is elevated again, now you have, at the very least, gestational hypertension, which means that you're pregnant with elevated blood pressure. Depending on how your labs come back, it may show that your liver is now struggling, your kidneys may be struggling, maybe there's some clotting stuff going on. Then you also have preeclampsia. That means you have preeclampsia. But if you just have elevated blood pressures, just slightly, like that 140/90, and you don't have anything else, then it's just blood pressure, elevated blood pressure, gestational hypertension. So those are the little differences there, okay? So we're not sure of the cause, and now you know there are two different types. Now there's another type that's called, or another way that we call preeclampsia, and it depends on the level of your blood pressure. And then where we go from there as far as your treatment and what to look forward to. So now you know gestational hypertension is elevated blood pressure, 140/90, on more than one occasion, right? If you're in a hospital already, we say greater than 4 hours apart. So if you came in at noon and at 4 p.m. you're still having 140/90 or higher, nothing else much is going on, you at least have gestational hypertension. If your lab work comes back and I see that there are other abnormalities on top of that 140/90, 145/95, now you have preeclampsia, okay? Another one though, another level, if it progresses, can be preeclampsia with severe features. And what that means is you meet, just like preeclampsia, just like gestational hypertension, you have elevated blood pressures. They're up there. But severe features means that we're not talking 140/90 anymore. We're talking now 160/110 baseline. That or higher usually rules you in for severe features. That, along with your labs all showing abnormalities, your platelets are under 100. Platelets are a measure of your clotting ability. All of these things, maybe a headache that hasn't gone away in forever, usually that means you're going to be hospitalized, and your care team, depending on where you are in your pregnancy, depending on how far along you are, how severe your symptoms are, will either work to try to stabilize you always. Preeclampsia with severe features will get you a ticket into admitting into the hospital so that your care team can stabilize you and then discuss with you what that looks like for you moving forward in your pregnancy. So let's talk about who's at higher risk for preeclampsia. Usually, from what we have seen, women who are first-time pregnant or people who are pregnant for the first time, people who have a family history of preeclampsia, like say your mom had preeclampsia, people who have had preeclampsia in previous pregnancies are likely, like 7 times more likely to have it in subsequent pregnancies. People who come into pregnancy already with some type of health conditions, whether that be high blood pressure just in general, diabetes, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus. So women are people who are at the lower end of the age spectrum, so teenage pregnancies, and people who are at the higher end of the age spectrum, 35 years old or 40 years old and higher. Also, we have seen that Black women have a higher risk of preeclampsia, about 60% higher risk when compared to white women. In recent studies, when they've looked at American-born Black women and immigrant-born Black women, it has been shown that immigrant-born Black women, or Black women who are immigrants to the United States, are about 26 to 30% less likely to have preeclampsia than American-born Black women, which just further supports the theory and the body of knowledge that it is the unique standing of the Black American person and the social and political struggles and how that affects our health. So now let's talk about signs and symptoms. What are signs and symptoms? I know you hear that all the time. Signs are things we can measure and things we can see. Usually, like I can say you have high blood pressure by measuring it and seeing the high blood pressure. And symptoms are things that you report, things that you feel, right? You would say to me, oh, I'm feeling dizzy, or I have a headache, or my vision is changing. And we use signs and symptoms to put together something to help with the diagnosis. So signs and symptoms of hypertensive disorders in pregnancy or preeclampsia can be, you don't have anything except I measured your blood pressure and I noticed it's high. 2, you're having a headache. You've had a headache for days and nothing makes it go away, not even medication. You woke up and your face is swollen and it's swollen around your eyes and you press in and it's indenting and your hands are swollen. I know people hear a lot about about feet and legs swelling, but that can happen in pregnancy without any hypertensive disorders because of the way our circulation changes. So I don't focus so much on that unless it comes in combination with all the other things, right? A sudden onset of nausea and vomiting. Randomly, you're doing well, you didn't do anything out of the ordinary, you're 36 weeks and all of a sudden you feel terrible, you have a headache and you're vomiting and nausea and you just feel really out of the ordinary. Vision changes, you can have blurry vision, lights, spots. Some people lose vision for a little bit, right? So these are usually sudden onset of symptoms. You're like, something is off. Sometimes we call this epigastric pain. You feel like you've got some acid refluxy going on and nothing is happening, and you've got the headache, and you've got the fluffy face. Any of these symptoms, if you are currently pregnant, call your doctor or just go to the nearest hospital to check it out if you are worried. The only cure for preeclampsia and hypertensive disorders in pregnancy is giving birth to the baby. So knowing that, we have to look at ways that we can help either prevent, or really mostly, since we don't know the real cause, like the definitive cause, it's really decreasing your chances of developing this condition. And in the medical profession in the Western world, in the United States, there are a couple of things that we discuss as providers. I hope this was incredibly helpful. I hope this gave you some basic minimum knowledge so that you can further the conversation and feel empowered to have a healthy, happy pregnancy. Until next time.